Hello there. In a world where international law was once seen as a safeguard against war and oppression, today that very system faces one of its gravest challenges. As Gaza bleeds under relentless bombardment, and a controversial Israeli plan seeks to divide this strip into so-called humanitarian islands, the global institutions meant to protect the vulnerable stand on shaky ground. The United States, under President Donald Trump, has doubled down on shielding Israel from scrutiny, first by withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council, and now by pressurizing allies to silence criticism. The result? A growing void of accountability, even as the death toll in Gaza surpasses 50,000 and humanitarian workers are killed in broad daylight. Tonight, we ask a difficult question. Can the international order survive when justice is selectively applied and human rights are sacrificed on the altar of politics? I'm Mark Summers. This is Think Tank. According to an investigative report published by Ahram Online, Israel is moving ahead with a controversial plan to fragment the Gaza Strip into so-called humanitarian islands, a strategy designed by the Israeli Defense and Security Forum and leaked earlier this week. The plan envisions dividing Gaza into tightly controlled zones, or displaced persons cities, each administered by a temporary Israeli-linked authority. These enclaves within an enclave would operate under biometric surveillance, exclude UNRWA and Hamas, and receive aid only through systems approved and monitored by Israel. The report warns that this is not a humanitarian initiative, but rather a blueprint for permanent military control, mirroring apartheid-era models used to segregate and weaken local populations. Ahram Online further highlights that this proposal coincides with intensified Israeli military operations, new settlement plans inside Gaza, and the displacement of almost 90% of its population. Egypt and the Arab League have strongly condemned the plan, describing it as a form of ethnic cleansing, and have instead proposed a 3-year Gaza construction initiative supported by international partners. With over 50,000 Palestinians killed since October 2023, and more than 2 million facing starvation under a total blockade, this raises urgent questions about Israel's long-term intentions and whether international law has the strength to respond. Now, to discuss the legal, political and humanitarian implications of this development, we are joined now by Khaled Dawood, who is the managing editor of Al Ahram Weekly, and Dr. Majid Boudin, who is the professor of international law. Thank you both for joining me here on the program. Mr. Dawood, we'll come to you first. Israel's humanitarian islands plan proposes turning Gaza into fragmented zones under tight Israeli control. Do you see this as a response to the humanitarian crisis, or rather a strategy to permanently dismantle Palestinian sovereignty?
Well, thank you, Mark, for having me. But let me start by saying that just like listening to the word humanitarian coming out of Israel after all what's been going on after the resumption of its vicious war beginning of March, it just sounds ridiculous, because there is nothing humanitarian whatsoever about this. I mean, it's very obvious. Israel is, putting maximum pressure on Hamas in order to respond to its request to release all Israeli living hostages held by the group, but without actually any promises related to full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip or ending the war officially, as the original ceasefire agreement stated, the one that was signed a few days before Mr. Trump, U.S. President Donald Trump, came into office. But right now, we can openly and clearly state that this agreement does not exist anymore, because all the details of this agreement has been disregarded. And unfortunately, this is happening while there is total American collusion and silence towards the crimes that Israel has been committed since the resumption of the war on March 1st. I mean, obviously, the report that was cited by Al Ahram Online is probably just another proposal confirming what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated like a few days ago, saying we're not hiding it. We want to break down Hamas. They want them to surrender, give up their weapons, and then probably get deported to other countries. And after that, Israel will maintain full military control over the Gaza Strip in a manner that's not necessarily different from what existed before 2005. And at the same time, Mr. Netanyahu added that after getting this kind of military control, they will start the plan to voluntarily deport Palestinians from Gaza, according to the now infamous plan that was originally proposed by the U.S. President Donald Trump, although Trump himself has probably stopped speaking about it, I mean, in recent weeks, not as much as the situation was before. But right now, this plan is totally adopted by the Israelis. They have announced that they have an agency that's going to work on this voluntary displacement, that they have started asking the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, to contact other countries that might be ready to accept having Palestinian refugees to their territories. But the problem, Mark, is that this is all happening at the massive expense of Palestinian blood. I mean, since Israel has resumed its war, we've been seeing an average of like maybe 50 to 100, and if not more, people getting killed, and a tremendous violation of any standard humanitarian standards, any laws of war of whatsoever. I mean, hitting hospitals again, hitting refugee camps, refugee buildings organized by the United Nations, and killing massive number of people, and including children and including women. And there is no denial from the Israeli side that this is happening with a purpose, the purpose of breaking down Hamas, turning the local population against the group, and basically restoring Israeli military occupation on the Gaza Strip. Again, all this happening while the world is only watching, not even like, Mark, at one point of like, I'm a journalist covering Palestinian-Israeli cause for over 30 years, but in those kinds of conditions, at least we see UN Security Council meeting, some sort of serious appeals by the international community to Israel to refrain from what it's doing. I mean, this is even to happen under the former US President Joe Biden. But right now, we're not seeing this. We're seeing a green light from the United States of America, providing them with weapons, all the weapons they need, over $8 billion in the last few weeks only, and lifting restrictions on the violent Israeli settlers. So unfortunately,
okay. Well, I just want to bring in Dr. Boudin because you are, Dr. Boudin, a professor of international law. So legally speaking, does the creation of these Israeli-administered displaced persons cities, or as they almost laughingly call them, humanitarian islands, does this violate international law?
Of course, because it's Israel as the occupation authority, the occupying authority, has obligations toward the Palestine and toward the Palestinian populations, and toward also the Palestinian territory. They don't have the right to dismantle the existing structure of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza specifically, and by dividing it into these small piece of lands. Already Gaza is a small piece of land, and by dividing it into this kind of small islands or small quarters, is against the sovereignty of Palestine and against the way the people are using to live, and Israel has no right to do that. By doing that, they are dismantling the continuity of the territory, the continuity of the way of living of the Gaza, the people in Gaza, and this is not allowed by international law. Israel, by doing that, they are continuing their plan to digest, if we may say so, in the figurative way, Gaza into something which is completely under the control of Israel, and they are pursuing their plan, but their plan has different angles and different ways. There is the military way, which is to occupy Gaza. Now they are claiming that they are doing this to free, first of all, to free the Israeli hostages. Now this is the time for Hamas to release, and under international law, Hamas cannot keep these people as hostages. Taking hostages is also against international law. This gave a pretext, an excuse for Israel and Israel to kill 50,000 people, more than that now, to destroy Gaza. And why Hamas is continuing this, knowing that this will bring more disaster and more casualties and more killings. So there is no reasons.
Okay. I just wanted to go back to Khalid Dawood. In just over 2 weeks, Israel has killed more than 1,000 Palestinians, including hundreds of children. Do you think the world has become desensitized to these mass civilian casualties?
Indeed, I mean that's the very sad result, but it's not going to go without consequences. Again, I mean, like you mentioned the professor who just spoke now, Mr. Boudin, I mean, saying about international law. There are no more international laws. There are no more agreements. And while I'm no supporter of Hamas by whatsoever kind, but again, I mean, the reality of the occupation, there is no Hamas in such the same manner in the West Bank, and nevertheless, the Israelis continue with their racist policies and colonization policies in the West Bank and in Gaza itself. So it's very obvious that, I mean, Israel doesn't need excuses, because if keeping hostages is against international law, but even in terms of revenge, in terms of seeking to free those hostages, Netanyahu is risking, first of all, the lives of those hostages that are basically spread all over Gaza. So, I mean, if the aim is to free them, I mean, they might kill them, actually, as has happened in the past. And then at the same time, even according to the international law of at least the ones that we know, even if you want to target a Hamas militant and he's hiding in the middle of a hospital or in the middle of a refugee camp, that's no justification to kill 100 or 200 people on the side just because you are targeting that person. Israel wants to empty Palestine, all of Palestine, from Palestinians, whether in Gaza, whether in the West Bank. And right now, and even before October 7, we had the worst right-wing government in Israel's history. And this government is coming with a plan to basically expand settlements and restore Israeli control right now over Gaza, and empty the Palestinian land, implement this Trump proposal to voluntarily ask Palestinians to leave. This is actually what's happening. But again, let me warn you that this is not going to be without consequences. And if we get to see more violence all over the region in reaction to this Israeli brutality and more kind of, feelings of injustice among our part of the world, seeing that the world is so much silent when these crimes and all these children are being killed, we're blowing up the entire concept of international law, the entire concept of equal human rights. This is basically the price of what's happening. And if other countries started behaving in the same manner like Israel in the future in other similar wars, like, say, for example, Russia and Ukraine, people always say Israel has been doing this and they have never been punished. Israel, there are arrest warrants for the Israeli prime minister and the former defense minister, and basically Mr. Netanyahu is even traveling. He's going to Hungary, and Hungary pulls out from the International Criminal Court just because of Netanyahu, and we see the United States imposing sanctions on the judges of the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice just because they are seeking to implement the international law. So unfortunately, that's a very dangerous situation. But let me also be objective and say that the world now is going through lots of chaos since Mr. Trump came into office. I mean, it's not just the situation in Gaza. We have the war going on in Ukraine. We have now all this trade war fears. So the world is basically, unfortunately, is such in a state of chaos, and Israel is definitely exploiting this in order to implement its own plans in Gaza, if not to reorder the entire region, as Mr. Netanyahu repeatedly said, that the response to October 7 is not going to be limited to Gaza, but also targeted against Iran and targeted against Lebanon, targeted against Syria. And unfortunately, with the current state of chaos, maybe Netanyahu feels he has the chance to achieve those kinds of plans.
And coming back to you, Dr. Boudin, the targeted killing of 15 aid workers, including Red Crescent and UN personnel, has drawn global condemnation. The footage that this young medic took whilst taking fire from the Israeli forces in his ambulance, praying and talking to his mother in his prayers on this video was absolutely devastating to watch. It's clearly a war crime. The lights were on the ambulances, unlike what the Israelis said. The lights were on. They were clearly medical personnel, yet they attacked them anyway. Is this prosecutable? Prosecutable? And what are the obstacles to the prosecution? Because condemnation isn't cutting it.
Of course, this is prosecutable, and it's urgently needed to take a case before the international court, the International Criminal Court, and also to go again before the International Court of Justice. But here, we have to raise an essential point. The matter is not a matter of international law. The matter is that the world is suffering now, especially because, and after what we have seen in Gaza, is suffering from the non-application of international law, not from the international law. International law is the only protection the world have, and people like the Palestinian people have. They have. They cannot have another shield. They cannot have another weapon except international law. They have no army. They have no economic forces. They have nothing. They have only international law.
But that's despite what Mr. Dawood was just saying, that this whole conflict is making a mockery of international law.
Yes, no, not at all. The problem is here, is if we abandon international law, we have nothing more, okay? But if we stick to international law, we say that international law is not made applicable. And this is the fact that Israel doesn't apply international law, doesn't obey, doesn't respect international law, and that it's supported by other countries and superpowers to obtain that international law is not made applicable is the real point. And we have to make the distinction here. International law is fundamental for protection. Here, the non-application of international law is by itself a violation of international law. We have to go this way and not throw the baby with the water of the bath. And we have to make sure that we claim application of international law, but we claim also that international law is not made applicable for the Palestinians. And this means that the Palestinians are victims of a denial of justice. And denial of justice is also prohibited by international law because it's against international public policy. And this is what we call the jus cogens in international law. It means the imperative rules are not made applicable and they are violated. Here, this is the window, this is the door from which we have to go to obtain justice. And the second point is Israel is now protected from the application of international law. It's made that international doesn't apply to Israel and to the Israeli leaders. And so the crimes are not punished and the violations are not punished, not because of international law, because of the non-application of international law. And here is the major point. The history is changing. Now it's a fact that the world is in a chaos, but the chaos cannot stand forever. And we will come back. And this is why we have to stick to international law and ask for how we can apply international law to the Palestinian people. This is not an easy task. This means that we have to gather forces and to put pressure to obtain application of international law and to claim this application of international law.
Okay. Well, coming back to you, Khaled Dawood, on a slightly different part of this issue, Microsoft employees have been openly accusing the company of fueling genocide by providing AI to the Israeli military. Do you think there's any significance in this wave of employee-led protests? Could it help reshape the public discourse in the West?
Definitely, Mark. This is just yet another scandal. As much as the scandal you've mentioned about the rescue workers getting killed in Palestine and Gaza, first we have Israeli denial, and then the United Nations, for the first time, probably directly saying Israel killed those 15 rescue workers. And then we have this video that was, reported by the New York Times today, very clearly denying the Israeli story, all of it. And even if Israel is going to say we're going to conduct an investigation and they find that one or two of the soldiers were guilty of misunderstanding or being under pressure or something like this, maximum they will get is going to be reprimanded. Just again, to mention something about international law. And I just think that if this incident in particular, there are so many other incidents over the past 18 months that, it just, you get reminded of this racism, of this brutal killing, indiscriminate killing every day. But this particular incident, considering that it's the latest, it just shows how Israel is handling the situation in the Gaza, and entire Palestine with total disregard to Palestinian life. And the same applies, as you've mentioned, to this policy by Microsoft to provide Israel with the latest AI technology in order to randomly select Palestinians who might be suspected of getting involved with Hamas or having some sort of link with Hamas of whatsoever kind. And if you remember, Mark, earlier in this war, there were even reports of Israel lowering the threshold for targeting suspected Hamas members, not just senior commanders or just commanders, but even if someone was driving someone was monitoring the street so that waiting for Israeli troops, lowering the threshold through these AI programs in order to kill Palestinians on a massive scale. So, again, this all adds up. I agree with the professor of international law, of course. Yes, it's very important to use it. Palestinians are very clever, in documenting those kinds of incidents, including the collusion of Microsoft and other international companies helping Israel killing Palestinians at random. And I agree. Times will not remain the same. We have the South Africa model that lasted for a very long time. At the end of the day, it collapsed because, again, yes, it's what's happening right now in Palestine, in Gaza, is mind-blowing, really, in terms of the amount of blood, the amount of people who are getting killed. But again, also international consciousness is changing. All over the world, in Europe, even inside the United States, despite all the suppression that the current U.S. administration is carrying out in a manner against Palestinian activists and pro-Palestinian activists in a manner that's not different from any totalitarian state. But nevertheless, this all will add up. And I am sure sooner or later, that Palestine is going to restore its independence and Israel is going to be condemned and maybe perhaps even prosecuted over those tremendous crimes. But my fear that until this happens, I mean, we're going to continue seeing this, basically indiscriminate and careless killing of Palestinian people as we have seen over the past, 18 months. Hopefully, I mean, again, let's get back to real life. The Israeli Prime Minister is going to Washington after tomorrow. His own personal envoy, Witkoff, who has been totally silent about Israeli crimes, might be coming to the region. So hopefully, in real life, we can see some restoration of the ceasefire that existed before the war started again on March 1st.
Okay. Well, Dr. Boudin, just coming back to you, we have 1 minute left. Gaza is now being carved into corridors, Netzarim, Fidelfi, Morag, effectively turning it into disconnected blocks. Could this be interpreted as a form of de facto annexation without declaration?
Of course, it's already at the annexation since they attacked the population. They occupied Gaza. Already, Gaza was never free. It was from the beginning. Since 2007, they are under the siege of the Israelis, and the International Court of Justice made it clear that Israel is the occupying force of Gaza.
Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. We'll end it there, but thank you both for joining us here on the program. Mr. Khalid Dawood, Managing Editor of Al-Ahram Weekly, and Dr. Majid Boudin, Professor of International Law. Thank you both very much indeed. And that's the end of the program that we have for you today. As Gaza faces an increasingly fragmented future and the international legal system is put to the test, the world watches, some in silence, others in protest. The question remains, will principles prevail over power? Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Think Tank. Thanks for watching and have a good day.